So a really, really nice simplified way to look at color so that we can feel less overwhelmed and have a really nice path to follow. So the first things first is planning our route. So again, this is kind of like everything that we're going to touch on today. So where am I starting from? What this really means is looking at the canvas itself, and it's really all about that consultation. What is the hair type? What is the density? What is the texture? What is the natural level? Exactly where you're beginning, because that is the one of the most important parts of planning your route is really identifying where you're starting from, right? And next is where you're going. So what is the image that your client brings to you in the chair? What's the ideal hair goal for them? So often this comes down to pictures that they're showing you, inspiration that they want, tweaks of what they have to what they want to have, and really getting clear on what your client imagines the end result to be, and being honest about what's achievable that day. How are you going to get there? So once you know clearly where you're starting from and clearly where you're going, you can really start to plan the application. So how much lift do you need? Do you need to cover white? What is the actual technique you're going to use? And what is the timing, right? So really how you're going to get there comes down to the real specifics of application and formula. So let's start with where are you starting from? One of the most important things when it comes to planning your route or color application is identifying the exact and natural level or the starting point of the client's hair. So, how light or how dark their hair is at their natural, as well as what's existing or previously color treated on the mid lengths and ends. So, for us to determine how to get from A to B, really identifying the exact natural level, meaning we're not just kind of looking at it from across the room, guessing the natural level, but we're really going in there and checking the exact depth or lightness of their hair and being very, very specific. The other thing we're going to notice when we check the natural level is the warmth or the coolness of the hair, because everyone's hair is made up of different pigment types, right? It's all the same pigment, but sometimes in different quantities. So no matter who you are or what you look like or where you come from, all hair is made up of the same pigment types in different quantities, but it's all melanin. And we have eumelanin, eumelanin and pheomelanin, which give us the combination of pigments that make up all hair color. So our eumelanin pigments and our pheomelanin pigments ultimately sort of combine in different concentrations. And we can often see the warmth of the coolness of the natural hair color, which gives us an indication of how much of each pigment is truly into the hair. So this visual is a example of the root bulb itself beneath the skin and how this melanin is produced and distributed into the hair shaft. Our two different pigment types, as I was mentioning, are eumelanin and pheomelanin. So eumelanin is actually a quite large pigment type. It sits around the outer layers of the hair, so on the outer layers of the cortex, so closest to the cuticle layer. And it's quite a large pigment, up to 100 times larger than a pheomelanin pigment. And it's often what we see when we look at someone's natural hair color because it sits towards the outer layers. So it's black, brown, or neutral in color, and it really influences the lightness or the darkness, so that the depth of the shade. And it's a lot easier to break down. So as we put lightener onto even the most dark natural level, within 5 to 10 minutes, we often have broken down that dark natural level and we start exposing the underlying pigment, which is our pheomelanin. This is much, much smaller, up to 100 times smaller than a eumelanin pigment, and they come in red, yellow, and orange. Okay, so these pigments are tightly packed in through the center of the cortex. And as we lighten the hair, we start to expose them, which is why they're called underlying pigments, because we don't often see them right away when we look at the hair, but they're exposed as we lift. So they're underlying every natural level, whether we see them or not. Now, if they're very strong within the hair, if pheomelanin pigments are really dominant, or a client has a higher quantity of them, often we can see that warmth and that reflection even from looking at their natural hair. right? So, really looking at the canvas, looking at the depth of the hair, getting specific about the exact natural level, and predicting and planning for those underlying pigments to become part of the formula. And we're going to talk a lot more about that throughout the presentation. Now, if someone has white hair, then this is basically melanin has stopped producing, so ceased to produce. We're not getting any more pigment through that root bulb, and the hair becomes white, not gray. So often we hear, oh, gray hair, but gray hair is actually just the look of natural and white combined that makes it look gray. But the hair itself is colorless. So over time and as clients age, we know their hair becomes colorless. No more pigment is being produced in certain hairs or certain follicles. And that hair often becomes not only colorless, but also resistant to color and a bit more wiry in texture. So we have to treat that hair a little bit differently and really take a good look at the client. Even after years with a client, you might need to keep checking on the percentage of white and the texture of the hair so that we can make special accommodations. Oftentimes, when looking at a client's hair, if it is gray or white or becoming gray or white, it can make the natural level look even lighter and make the overall color look lighter. So if the client is 20% or 25% white, their natural level will look 25% lighter as it's intermixed. So it's a really good idea to get in and double check how much white they have and where it's distributed. Sometimes we have clients with 100% white in the front and zero by the time you get to the nape, right? Or sometimes it's more evenly distributed. So we're looking at the percentage and the distribution so we can make the right color choices. And this is all just part of having a really good client consultation. So, talking about the natural level, how important it is, as we've mentioned, to identify the exact starting point. The best option for us to work with is using our natural swatch or a natural level, which is our -0 series. Oftentimes, we use our Igora Royal, which is our permanent color line. So, from that big red book there, we can grab the -0 series, which can be held up and placed. Actually, I really like these ones as well because they are sort of fanned out. So you can actually place them right in and almost snug them into the natural level and see if they match. So we're trying to get that exact starting point. Now, sometimes when we place this swatch up to the hair, it might not match exactly perfectly. So, as a little bit of a tip, if you're not sure, for example, on the screen, you can see that the natural level sits quite close to a 7. But if you are not sure, let's say you place your swatch into the client's hair and it doesn't quite match any one of them, always assume it's the darker of the two that you're sort of deciding between, because most clients would rather be slightly lighter than slightly darker. And also, it's a lot easier to tone something down than to relift again something lighter. So it's just a best practice. If you're not sure between two shades, which one matches best, always assume they're the darker of the two. Now, sometimes when we look at the natural level, we're also looking at the white hair percentage, as I was mentioning. And another little favorite part of this color chart that I love is at the very back of the book, you actually have the color wheel and the white hair selector. So if you're looking at the percentage of white, sometimes it can be hard actually to identify. Is it 10% white? Is it 30% white? Is it 50% white? And anytime we're over 50% white, often we're making different choices and we have to add a natural into our formula to make sure that we actually do have that natural depth. So what this swatch actually shows you is different levels of natural. So on the bottom 4, you have the level 4 natural with different amounts of white. Excuse me. It shows you different percentages of white on 2 different natural levels. So the bottom actually shows you a level 4, and then the top is on a level 7 with higher and lower percentages of white. So you can use this as a guide to help you understand how much white is there, and also a little indicator of what the natural level looks like with different percentages. All right, so that's number 1. I think we all learned that in hair school. Now, where are we going to check the natural level? The best place to check this is underneath the part line, so off center from the part. Don't check right on the part because that's often lighter due to sun exposure, but just underneath the crown and off center from the part. Plump the hair off that scalp so that light can go through, so you get a really good indicator of the natural level. And try to make sure that you do that every single time as the beginning of the very first step of your color formula. All right, next thing to look at is the texture and the density of the hair. So, why do we want to look at this? Everyone's hair is slightly different. And when we look at the texture, what we're talking about here when we talk about texture is whether it's fine, medium, or coarse. Okay, so that is a measurement of the diameter. So fine hair is a very small hair type, and the diameter of the hair is going to be much smaller than someone with coarse hair. What that means as well is that there's going to be less pigment in that hair, and it also can have a more fragile or lesser tensile strength. So it can only handle so much when it comes to chemical services, and we have to be a bit more protective. When it comes to coarser hair, we know that it probably has a little bit more strength, but also a lot more pigment, and sometimes can be harder to lift, right? So we make different choices based on the fabric, and this is a way that we can measure that. So if you're not sure, if you've ever looked at the texture of the hair and you're really trying to understand a little bit more, take one individual strand from the client's hair and just place it between your fingers. A fine hair texture is going to be a little bit harder to see just one individual piece. It's almost like you can't even feel it between your fingers, very, very lightly, right? When you come into medium, it's easier to see. You can feel a slight bit of that texture within your fingers. And of course, a coarser hair type is very easy to see, and you can actually feel that texture very easily between your fingers. So it's just a good way to sort of test and see what is the actual texture. Now, when it comes to the density is basically how many hairs per square inch or per surface area. So density also matters because, of course, we need to take special steps when it comes to our applications, when it comes to our technique, if we know thinner or finer areas on the scalp versus denser areas, right? So making sure that we have good saturation and we're taking special care to those finer areas. All right, hair pattern. What is the hair pattern? This is where we look at the actual wave pattern of the hair, whether the hair is straight, wavy, curly, or coily, right? And this comes down to the shape of the follicle. So the rounder, the more circular the follicle, the straighter the hair is. As it becomes more oval shape or flatter in shape, we get curly, wavy, coily hair. And one thing that we want to make sure is when we're looking at the texture of the hair, that as we're planning our color applications, our formulas, that we take steps to give the best result on the way that the client wears their hair the most, right? So if you're wearing your hair curly a lot, or most of the time, curly hair tends to absorb light. When the hair is blown out smooth or flat ironed or very, very straight, it tends to reflect light. So we can make different choices to add more light or more highlights or lowlights, or place our patterns to really enhance the way that the hair will be worn naturally. All right. And of course, one of the most important things to look at when we're planning our route and we're looking at what we're starting with as the hair canvas is the condition, right? So hair can often become damaged. It can become porous. And when it's damaged and porous, it loses its elasticity and its strength. So we want to be a little bit more gentle, careful, never causing additional damage when the hair is already in a fragile state. So the porosity of the hair is when the cuticle is very open, as you can see in the diagram here. As that cuticle becomes very open, it can absorb color very quickly and sometimes end up being darker than what we want it to, or also fade faster, right? So looking at the porosity, we want to make sure that we take special steps to ensure the intensity of the shade, the longevity of the color, and looking hard at the hair where the hair is most porous gives us a really good indication of how we can start to formulate. So also when working with texture or condition of the hair that is very fragile and damaged, it's also important that maybe we consider bonding services, treatments to help repair the hair, or even adding in to our color formula, making sure that we have the best hair and the best health of the hair possible. So when it comes to our care products, we have our Repair Rescue. If you're looking for something very rich and intense repair from BC Bonicure. We also have our Blonde Me range, which has within the entire care portfolio treatments, shampoos, conditioners, masks, and all of these products have bond enforcing properties. So not only are we protecting the bonds with our lifting products, but we're also creating new bonds and creating a stronger hair structure that will hang on to color better, right? The healthier the hair, the longer our color lasts also. All right. So that really what we've just chatted about is really about a good consultation. It's about being thorough, really looking at the canvas before we begin so we can talk about where we're going and how we're going to get there next. All right, so where are we going? This is our consultation where we really plan the target color. Oftentimes, our clients will be bringing in pictures of their dream hair, and we often have to bring some reality to the equation because it's really looking at what's possible and from everything that you've discovered from your where you're starting, what can be done that day and what is achievable within that appointment, right? And also being really, really clear with your client of what it is that they see, especially if they brought an image into you. So when they're bringing a picture in and a client says, hey, like I'd love to have this color today. This is how I'd like to change it from the last time. We can't assume that what we're seeing in that photo is the same thing as what our client sees. It could be slightly different. We might be attracted to a certain part of that image or see the image in a way from a hairstylist perspective, whereas they're looking at it from a client's perspective. They might really love a certain part of the very front, but really what's happening in the back of the hair, they haven't really considered, right? So we're looking at all of the different aspects of the image and always making sure that you confirm with the client that what you see in that image is also what they see and that they would love to have everything that you see and everything that they see. So let's look at some of the questions. You want to ask them, what do they want? What do they like about the photo or the target destination? What do they want? Is there anything they don't want? So is there something in that picture that they're like, actually, I don't love that part. I really only this is the part that I want, right? Looking at the history of their hair, whether they have color treated, color buildup, that porosity, all of those consultation tools from where you're starting, so that you can have a conversation about their limitations as well, right? So, if they want to go blonde, if they want to be blonder, how many appointments, how much time are we willing to spend, cost, money, and time frame that the client actually has to spend with you so that you can actually give them some realistic expectations about what they can achieve that day. So I think determining the target color and being really, really clear about it is also super important because if you don't know exactly where you're going, it's really hard to plan a route to get there, right? So this is the destination. Be specific. So a picture speaks 1,000 words, as I've mentioned. A lot of the time, our clients do bring in their pictures with them. Some interesting fun facts is it takes as little as 13 milliseconds for the human brain to process an image. This is why, of course, we say a picture speaks 1,000 words because it's so, so effective as opposed to just describing what we want. And even bringing out swatches is not a bad idea. Looking at a picture and then identifying a certain tone direction on a swatch. Bring that swatch out. That image or that visual is going to have such high impact in terms of what our target color is and whether our client is really comfortable with that or really likes that end result to imagine it on themselves. Also, 78% of all information that we take to understand each other is through our eyes, right? So what we see is carrying such a large weight compared to what is said. Now, working with images with our clients, of course, is super, super helpful. But there are also some things where what we see with color, what our client sees with color can be quite different. So just taking a moment here to talk about how we see color. So for every client, we all, of course, have, the same base in terms of how our eyes work. But how we visually perceive color can be different. So, in terms of how our eyes work, we have two main components. We have our rods and we have our cones. Our rod cells are going to be working when we are in low light intensities. So they ultimately pick up like the shade of lightness or darkness, often working in sort of the gray scale. So think of it when you get up in the middle of the night, maybe you're going to the washroom and the lights aren't really on, but you can see the shapes. You can see the wall. You can see that there might be a painting on the wall, but you're not seeing the color. This is when your rods are working. So very monochromatic vision, and low light intensities, working in low light intensities. Then we have our cones, and our cones are perceiving most of the color. So they work a lot more with brighter tones in the chromatic color world. We can perceive with our cones different colors of red, green, and blue. And each one of the cones actually identifies a different color category. So when it comes to people who are colorblind, who maybe see colors slightly skewed, it's because one of the cones is working a little bit less than the others, and it can slightly skew the way that we see things. So that I think is quite interesting. But also, when both rods and cones are working, we have really the full perspective. But how we might describe what we see would also be different. So even if we see it physically the same, how we might describe it or how we perceive it emotionally can be different. So when it comes to image perception, we want to take our picture that our client has brought in and really talk about the target level and tone. So if that client is sitting at a very dark natural level, and you can see in the image that the target tone is a level 7, then we want to actually be clear about the lightest color that we see and how much lift will be required. For example, is the target color warm or cool? Does it have different color reflections in it that we want to clarify with our client and make sure that they're seeing the same thing, right? So do they like warm colors? Do they like cool colors? And if the image is showing you something that you want to be clear on as an end result, then we can really have that conversation with the client. Is pre-lightening required? So when we look at a picture, for example, this one here, it is very obvious that pre-lightening is required. But sometimes when we're looking at soft and natural colors, we might not know that, or our client might not know that powder lightener or pre-lightening or bleaching is required, right? So this is often coming into play when we need more than 5 levels of lift, or if we're lifting out, of course, color treated hair, because color doesn't live color, we have to move into our lightening products. And lastly, sometimes we need to lift or pre-lighten the hair to get a cooler end result. We might be able to achieve lift without bleach or a powder lightener just by using color, but we can't always dissolve enough pigment to get the coolness that is required. So it could be that determines whether we need some pre-lightening. What technique is used. So, of course, an image can really help us understand whether the look or the technique that we need to achieve the look is either freehand, foils, balayage, maybe it's a color melt. So it can give us a really good indication of the technique that we want, and also what steps are required in terms of the coloring process, right? So if you're more interested actually to speak more about the image and how to achieve the technique, we have another program that you can go to called Image to Reality, where we really deep dive the process of reading an image even further down to the actual technique. All right. And our final step of the process is how are we going to get to that end result? So, when it comes to our step number 1, we have where are we starting through that very thorough consultation? Where are we going? So, we're on the same page as our client. We know what they see. We are all together with a clear vision, and everybody's on the same page. Now that we know those two things, where we're starting, where we're going, how are we going to get there? All right, so this is our roadmap in our color GPS. Actually, this screen shows you everything that you need to know to be a great colorist. This is the law of color. We have our natural leveling system from 1 to 10. We have our underlying pigments that are exposed as we lighten, so this all becomes part of the formula. And then we have our color wheel, which helps us either neutralize or enhance the tones that we're trying to achieve. So this is really all the information that you ever need to plan your route and to really create a wonderful formula. So when we're looking at the natural level, it's really important, as we mentioned, to identify exactly where we're starting from, because if I know that I'm starting from a level 3 and my target color is a level 6, I can now decide, oh, okay, if I'm going from a 3 to a 6, that means that's 3 levels of lift, and I'm going to need a specific developer to get me 3 levels of lift. So that would be my 9% 30 volume. Once you know the developer that you're using, well, if I'm using 30 volume, then I know how long to process, because every developer has a specific processing time. If I know that I'm going to a level 6, which is getting very specific about my target color, I can now look and see what is the underlying pigment that will be exposed, right? So at my level 6, I'm going to expose red orange. Then I'm going to use my color wheel to decide, okay, do I want red orange in the hair? And if I don't, I'm going to use the opposite color on the color wheel to actually neutralize that. So I get the level 6 with also neutralizing the underlying pigment, right? So every piece always comes into play. Even if I'm going darker, if I'm starting at a level 8 and I'm going to a level 4, I know that I'm depositing color. But what I also know is that the underlying pigment at a level 4 is red, and those pigments need to be replaced. Anytime that we're going over 2 levels darker than our starting point, we need to replace that underlying pigment at our target level, right? So everything here is important, and we use each piece of it in every formula. Now, in terms of our choices of products, when we are going lighter or darker, we have different options, right? So on the left, well, on my left, I think it's your left too, but we have type 1 and type 2, our first 2 color types, which are temporary color and semi-permanent. So starting with temporary color, this would be, for example, like a toning shampoo. This would be like a purple shampoo for blonde. The pigment is very large. It's a wash in, wash out, and often lasts only one shampoo. These products can sometimes be used in color correction or for small tweaks or enhancements to the shade, and are very helpful for maintaining the pigments that we want, but often are not the main part of the color formula, especially if we're making big changes. Now, semi-permanent color is definitely something that we do work with quite a bit, especially when it comes to corrective color. But our semi-permanent pigments are still non-oxidative. So like temporary color, they don't require a developer. They don't require any oxidation. They are considered a direct dye. So directly from the tube onto the hair, and often quite large pigments as well. Sometimes these pigments can be plant-based or food-based colors. For us, one of our color categories of semi-permanent is our Chroma ID. So Chroma ID is our direct semi-permanent bonding color masks. And these colors do fade out very gradually and are not permanent. So we can kind of date our color and not marry our color, and they gradually fade out over time. The other feature that is wonderful about working with semi-permanent is that it's very caring for the hair and can be a great option when it comes to fillers in color correction or for enhancing or maintaining your color at home. So Chroma ID would be an example of that, which is, again, a great option when we start talking about going darker. We actually have red, copper, and also gold tone directions in the semi-permanent that can be used to fill or replace back those underlying pigments. So a really great option. And of course, also because they're bonding, it makes the hair feel amazing and provides additional moisture and strength to the hair. So really an ideal situation when you're going from light to dark. So yeah, really good. If you have not tried it, you should. Okay, type number 3 is our demi-permanent. So now when we move over to the other side of the screen here, demi-permanent is oxidative. So anything that has a developer required would have an oxidative pigment of some kind. So that means we're going to activate those pigments with developer. Demi-permanent is for deposit only, so it is ammonia-free and often really great for when we're coloring darker, adding low lights, maybe doing quick color corrections where we need depth added back to the hair. Also great for toning or refreshing color. Then we have our permanent color, right? So permanent color is fully oxidative. This would be like our big red book. Our our Igora Royal would be considered our permanent color. And for this, we can lift up to 4 or even 5 levels with our high lift blondes, as long as we're working on virgin hair, right? So generally speaking, color does not lift color. We do have some specialty ranges that can do that for us, but generally speaking, if we're looking for more than 5 levels of lift, or we're lifting on color treated hair, then we need to move into our powder lightener, right? So permanent color is great for our white hair coverage, of course, so 100% coverage of white, as well as lifting natural. And can also be a great final shade if the hair is in healthier condition. So demi-permanence would be a little bit more conditioning and even a great shade as the final color if the hair is damaged. However, if it's very, very healthy and we're looking for the longest possible result, longest lasting possible result, then permanent colors is our choice. And last but not least, we have our lightener. So let's talk about lightener. So what is a lightener in the first place? Lightener is basically a persulfate-based product, and it can come in various different forms. Powder lightener is a high pH, so it's an alkaline product, about a pH of 10, which is actually 1,000 times more alkaline than the hair, which is, of course, why we can really swell the hair open and get a lot of lift with it. Now, when we work with this persulfate-based powder, mix with peroxide, hydrogen peroxide, and apply this to the hair, significant swelling of the cuticle happens and oxidation occurs, which actually breaks down the natural melanin as well as color-treated hair. So lighteners truly do disperse through the hair, decolorize, and create a lighter effect that is irreversible. We can get the most lift out of our powder lighteners compared to any other product. And when working with ours within Schwarzkopf Professional, we actually have bonding technology or fiber bond technology built into all of our powder lighteners. So whether it's Igora Vario or it's Blonde Me or it's our color remover, everything that we have within our portfolio is already built in with the maximum amount of bond protection. So super, super important that we do that because we're using one of the strongest products in the hair. We want to be the most caring at the same time. So when are we using lightener? As I mentioned before, anytime we're looking for more than 5 levels of lift on natural hair. If we're lifting the hair to a blonde shade and the hair is darker than a level 6, we are not going to achieve light blonde if they're a level 5 or darker. Even if they have virgin hair and we're looking for a level 10, we have to move into our powder lightener. Anytime we're working on previously color treated hair, of course, because we want to lift through that color. And also, of course, as well, looking at any type of corrective work. So this can be a great tool for us, powder lightener, of course, because we can lift through banding, we can lift through the color history, we can even out the tone, and we can really make big changes happen. And as I mentioned before, even though it's not on here, sometimes we have to use our powder lightener just to simply get a cooler end result. So we are able to lift with color, but we don't get to dissolve as many of the natural pigments as our lightener would be able to do. So sometimes it's about getting a cooler result in a double process, so pre-lightening and then toning, as opposed to that one step with color. Okay, so color. So that's our powder lightener. How does color work? Um, when it comes to oxidative pigments, we have the first step is that we actually have an alkalizing agent that, of course, penetrates the hair and swells the cuticle. This allows us to get into the hair in the first place and deep into the cortex. Step 2 would be hydrogen peroxide. So this actually is our H2O2. And this part of the equation actually lifts and lightens the natural color. It also creates a more even canvas or cleaning out the hair to prevent any color buildup. So working with hydrogen peroxide allows for the lift to happen. So if you think about your developers come in different strengths, and the higher the strength of the developer, the more lift can be achieved. So the higher the strength of the hydrogen peroxide. All right, number 3 is precursors. So precursors are basically colorless pigments. You can see a little bit on the diagram here, these sort of gray circles. Imagine a color precursor like an oxidative pigment that hasn't been activated yet. It's like a colorless molecule, very, very tiny as well. You can think of it like a little grain of sand, colorless grain of sand. And as it becomes activated, it combines with couplers. So precursors and couplers come together and they actually form a final color dye. And that is often much, much larger than the original precursor molecules. So this is actually building the final pigment by combining couplers and precursors. So the step 4 would be all of this coming together and being sort of cemented into the final shade. So different combinations of red, yellow, and blue come together, create the final molecule, which is up to 300 times larger. This is with the activation of hydrogen peroxide. So this H2O2 actually reacts with the dye molecules to create that final shade and joining them all together. All right, so then, of course, as everything is complete within the process, we've processed the correct amount of time to actually have these molecules join and be cemented together. This would be the final complete oxidation. So now these pigments are 300 times larger and they are trapped within the cortex of the hair. So we've lifted and diffused through the natural pigment, we've created the new molecules, and we now have that combination of natural and artificial color together, as well as the lift that has created the final shade. And that is how oxidative permanent color works. So what is a developer? We've talked about H2O2. What is the actual developer and why is it such an important part of the process? So hydrogen peroxide is H2O2. It's one of the most dominant ingredients in a color formula. It's one of the most predominant oxidants that helps to develop color. So working with hydrogen peroxide, of course, is super important. It can be considered super oxygenated water. So H2O is water, so H2O2 is our hydrogen peroxide. And how it's categorized by volume, so often 10, 20, 30, and 40 volume. And this refers to the amount or the volume of oxygen gas that's released from 1 milliliter of developer. Another way that we describe, which you can see on most of our bottles when it comes to the strength of a developer, is the percentage. So again, it would be the percentage of oxygen gas, the percentage of oxygen gas that would be released. All right, so let's talk about developers a little bit. We have 4 different strengths traditionally in hair color to choose from. So based on how much lift is required or deposit is needed, we're going to choose the correct developer. I always think of developer really is the boss of any color formula, because without it, your color is going nowhere. Your lightener is going nowhere. And depending on the strength, you get more or less in terms of action. And also depending on the strength, it tells you how long you need to process. So really the developer is the boss, almost more than the color in my opinion. So here we have our first developer, which is our 3% or 10 volume developer. This is Agora Royal, so this is really referring to permanent color here. Our 3% 10 volume is for deposit only. So this is our go-to developer strength if we're going darker or we're toning with permanent color. So the processing time is anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes. What that means is that developer will release oxygen for 5 to 30 minutes and will develop pigments for that amount of time. Sometimes if we're toning pre-lightened hair, we might only process 5 or 10 minutes. So that's why we have from 5 to 30 minutes for the timing. However, for full color deposit or complete processing time, especially if you're going darker and making a color change, then it would be 30 minutes. Now, our 6% 20 volume is for up to 2 levels of lift. And also, this is our go to developer strength for covering white. So, anytime we have that white, unpigmented hair, we have that coarser texture, it needs a little bit of a stronger developer to swell the cuticle and to ensure that we get all of that pigment into the hair and equalize it with the natural. So, processing time for a 6% or a 20 volume for up to 2 levels of lift and for white hair coverage is 30 to 45 minutes. So again, oxygen will be released for up to 45-minute processing time. And this is the ideal amount of time for white hair coverage, is always processing the full amount of time. Not only does that get you the coverage that you need, but it also gets you the longevity of that coverage. For up to 3 levels of lift, we're going to use our 9% 30 volume. And again, actually, we always say up to, if you've noticed, up to 3 levels of lift. And that is because we need to look at the texture of the hair. If our client has very fine hair or fine to normal texture, then we will achieve 3 levels of lift with the 30 volume. But for some clients, if the texture of their hair is very coarse and it's darker natural levels, then we would achieve 2 levels of lift with a 30 volume. So again, this is why it's really important to look at the texture of the hair before we begin our color for service. And then also knowing the exact level that we're starting with and where we're going to, so we can choose the correct developer with the right amount of lift. So our 9% 30 volume, also up to 45-minute processing time for up to 3 levels of lift. And then we have our 12%, which is our 40 volume. And this can get us up to 4 levels of lift, and often the developer that we use for our high lift blondes. So our level 10 series and our level 12 series. For our 12% 40 volume, we process 30 to 45 minutes. All right, so development time, we know, is because our developer can actually release oxygen for that amount of time. But the development time also means that we're getting the full development of the color pigment. So when it comes to temporary color or semi-permanent color, that pigment is already developed. So really it's just the amount of time that it needs to sit on the hair to get some longevity. So it could be as little as a few minutes to intensify a shade, and often it can be a visual process, especially if we're neutralizing. But when it comes to oxidative color or permanent color or even demi-permanent color, anything that requires that developer, then the timing is really crucial so that we can get not only the best results of the deposit, that we have the right the hair has been swelled and we're actually able to get our pigments into the hair, but also the development of the pigment itself. So the precursor and the coupler coming together and actually developing the final shade. So all of this is happening within those time frames, and it's really important to be able to process the full amount of time to get the best results and the best longevity. And I think sometimes too, what we might hear, or what you've probably heard in the past, is when it comes to toning, is to trust the process. So if you've ever applied a toner to the hair and as it's first starting to develop, you panic because you might see a little bit of a violet tone coming in, or a blue tone, or a pink tone. And maybe that's not your target tone, but it's just beginning to develop. So you need to trust the process, allow the pigment to actually turn into its final shade, and give it a little bit of time. This often ends us with beautiful blondes, beautiful neutralized end results, and also the longevity that we're looking for, because those pigments are developed, they're actually trapped into the hair. All right, underlying pigment. We touched on this earlier, but of course, this is something that we are considering when it comes to how are we going to get to our final shade. We're really looking at the underlying pigment at every level. So understanding, if we're lifting, what is the underlying pigment at the target color? And do we want to work with that pigment? Meaning it's in the direction of the shade that we're going to anyway. It's enhancing. It's a good thing to have that underlying pigment. Or if we want to neutralize that underlying pigment. So is it something that we need to cancel out and we don't want to have it within our formula? And the only way we can make those choices is by already predicting what is the underlying pigment at the target level that we're going to. So now we can decide, do we want to work with it or do we need to work against it? So at every level, you can see as we go lighter, we move through red into red-orange, right? Into our orange yellow as we start getting a little bit lighter. And then finally, in the lightest levels, we deal with just that yellow. So working with our color wheel, we can actually neutralize every single underlying pigment. So what is the color wheel? The color wheel is created by essentially the first three components are your primary colors. So that is your red, your yellow, and your blue. These colors are shades that just exist, which means they can't be made. And when working with a primary color, you can make every single other shade from just those three tones. Now, what are secondary colors? So secondary colors create or sort of complete the basic color wheel, which is anytime you take two primary colors, mix them together, you're going to get the secondary color. If we mix all three primary colors together, it should create neutral. And if we mix the opposite on the color wheel, so our secondary colors, with a primary color, it will also create neutral, right? And how come that works? I always think that that's an interesting question. So it really is just working smarter, not harder. If you watch, if I take blue and I mix it with red and orange, or excuse me, red and yellow, so all three primary colors, then I would get neutral. But I can take blue and mix it with orange, which really just is red and yellow. So I'm still using all three primary colors, and that will also create neutral. So using the secondary color, which is the opposite on the color wheel, is simply just adding all three primary colors in a smarter and more effective way. All right, tertiary colors. So if we really want to create the full spectrum, we can create all the colors in between, of course, our primary and our secondary color by mixing all of them side by side together. So neutralization, this is actually the color wheel that we have in all of the Schwarzkopf color charts. This is in our permanent, our demi-permanent, and really gives you a guide in terms of our numbering system, what to choose and what to work with to help us neutralize. So when it comes to this color wheel, we also can see that opposites on the color wheel will neutralize, but we have this gradient. So at the center of the color wheel, those tones are darker, right? Darker greens, darker reds, darker oranges. As you move to the outside of the color wheel, the shade or the intensity or the depth all becomes lighter. So the reason that we bring this up is because when we're neutralizing color, we want to use the same quantity of pigment and the same intensity of pigment opposite on the color wheel. And then and only then will we get full neutralization. Okay, so let's take a look at that. When we're trying to neutralize, imagine I had a very, very light, let's say light pastel blue, and I tried to use that to neutralize a dark burnt orange. Even though orange and blue are opposite on the color wheel, the intensity is not the same. The quantity of pigment is not the same if I have a light blue and a dark orange. So I'm actually looking to always have the same intensity and depth of pigments on the opposites of the color wheel so that they can cancel each other out. So for example, every amount of pigment that we add will slightly influence the other tone direction. So if I put violet and yellow together, but I don't have the same quantity of pigment, only when I have the exact same amounts will I achieve neutral. Any other side of the equation is going to sway slight different tone directions. And you know what? That's a good thing. That just means you make choices. Sometimes we don't always want to cancel every amount of warmth from the hair. We just want to cancel some. So if I have a level 9 yellow and I want to completely neutralize it, I would use a level 9 violet. But maybe I have a level 9 yellow and I just want to tone a little bit of that warmth. I can use a level 10 violet. So I always have choices, and it's just about making educated, smart choices and being able to predict that end result. So with that being said, our numbering system, when you are looking for something from Schwarzkopf Professional that is going to help cancel or neutralize, we have that color wheel, but we also have our tone directions very clearly laid out. So I'm going to play a little video for you all so you can see our numbering system and how it's going to really benefit when it comes to formulations. Then we're going to do some formulations to finish off our class today. Perfect. So, for those of you who already are using Schwarzkopf Professional and you're very familiar with the numbering system, then you'll be able to walk through this, as we go through. And that video is just a little reminder. For some of you who are new to our numbering system, it always just comes with a little bit of time, but it really is a nice gradient. If you noticed on that the last part of that video, where the lower the number is after the dash, the sort of more natural and cool the shade is. The higher the number, so the dash sevens, eights, and nines after the dash, the more vibrant or fashion tone the shade is. So I really love our Schwarzkopf numbering system because the first number is just the level of the color, but the numbers after the dash make sense, almost like think of it as like a thermostat. The lower the number, the sort of softer, cooler, the higher the number, the warmer the shade or the brighter the shade becomes. So that just gives you a little bit of a gauge. Okay, we are going to finish our presentation today in Color GPS by putting everything together that we talked about today with some formulas. So the first thing we have here, you can see I have the starting level. Then we're going to give a target shade, right? We need to then know, are we lifting or are we depositing? What is the underlying pigment at that target shade? And does it work with us or against us? And with all of that knowledge, we will choose our formula, right? So let's go through. For example, number 1, our starting color is a level 3. Our target color is 5-68. So this is a level 5, and it's got a chocolate tone as the majority, with a little bit of red. Okay, so this is a level 5 chocolate red. Now, because I'm going from a 3 to a 5, I'm going 2 levels lighter. So lifting 2 levels, I'm going to use my 6% 20 volume. Now, what is the underlying pigment at a level 5? What is the tone that we're going to expose by lifting the hair 2 levels? Because whatever that is, it's going to add itself into our formula. So the underlying pigment at a level 5 is red-orange. So the question is, does red-orange work in favor of our target color or against it? And because we are going to a chocolate red, we're going to work with that warmth. It's going to help us get a beautiful, rich chocolate red color. So what will be the actual color that I will choose, or the formula that I would choose, is going to be exactly what I'm going for, 5-68. So mixing that 1-to-1 with my 6% 20 volume, and I know it's not on here, but how long would I process that developer? Would be 30 to 45 minutes, right? Because I'm lifting 2 levels and I'm using 20 volume. Okay, our next example, starting at a level 5. The only reason I know that is because we checked the natural level exactly, and I know exactly where I'm starting. 8-0 is the target tone, so I'm looking for a level 8, but neutral end result. And the amount of lift that is required from a level 5 to a level 8 is 3 levels. So the developer that I would use is my 9% 30 volume, right? So now I'm lifting from a level 5 to a level 8. Which is our 3 levels of lift. But what is the underlying pigment at my level 8? What is the tone I'm going to expose? This is yellow and orange. So if my target color is neutral, then again, I'm going to ask, does this underlying pigment work with the target color or against it? So it's working against us. So we have to neutralize that warmth, and we need to do that in our formula before we even begin, right? Because it's always the shade that we use plus the underlying pigment that equals that target shade. So a good option would be using 8-1 or 8-11. So this is a level 8 cendre, which is a violet blue, or our double cendre or cendre extra, which is violet blue as well, but a little bit more for those more for extra neutralization, especially if the client has a lot of underlying pigment. So these would be a great option because I know that my violet blue is going to neutralize my yellow orange, right? All right, so now let's talk about a little bit of a more complicated formula where we have white hair coverage to consider as well. So our starting level here is a level 7. We know that our client is 60% white, and the client's target color is a 9-0. So we're lifting, but we're also covering white, and we're lifting 2 levels. So what developer would we use? It's going to be our 6% 20 volume again, because not only is that lifting us 2 levels, but that's the ideal developer to get the white hair coverage as well. Now, we still have 40% natural in the hair, so we are still going to expose some underlying pigment at that level 7. Oh, I don't know why that, or excuse me, at that level 9. So going to that level 9, we expose yellow. If our target color is neutral, then we need to cancel that yellow. So we have to neutralize the warmth, but we also need to cover the white. So what is a good formula here? We have our 9-0, which will give us the white hair coverage, plus our 9-1, which is a level 9 cendre, and that will neutralize the yellow for us. So our suggested mixing ratio for that is just 1:1 with 20 volume, and that will get us our end result. All right, last but not least, we have a level 5, but this client is 80% white, so we have a lot of white here. The target color is a level 7 intense copper, right? So 7-77. Now we're lifting 2 levels for the natural white, so we still have 30% of their natural, but oh my goodness, guys. I got this. They still have 20% of their natural hair that does need to be lifted, and 80% of the white that needs to be covered. So we're going to use our 6% 20 volume for that to get us the lift and the coverage at the same time. Now, our level 5 will expose some warmth, so we're going to get that orange yellow as we lift, and we want to work with that or against that. If our target color is copper, we're going to work with the warmth that is exposed, but we also need to cover the white. So what is a great formula? We have our level 7 natural mixed with our level 7 double copper. We don't need to cancel any warmth, so we're working with the shade that we want, but we're simply adding the natural in there for the coverage. Now, another alternative would be working with our Agora Royal Absolutes. We have the shade already pre-mixed with the perfect intensity and the natural already in there, so 7-70 would also be a great option. All right. So hopefully looking at this where you sort of like bring it all together. Where are you starting from? Where are you going? So gathering all that information and finally getting to how are you going to get there? This is really the purpose of Color GPS, or the program, is just to get our minds focused on how important each step of the process is, and making sure that we can actually predict the end result. So as I said at the beginning of the program, sometimes if you've been with in the industry for a long time, this might be just an easy reminder of what we need to focus on and how it all really comes together. But if you're new to the industry, these are the simple steps that make you more confident, that allow you to understand color a little bit better and become, I always say, like a fortune teller, where you can actually predict what is going to happen. So the more confident that you feel, and the more that you really can make those choices in advance to get the color that you're looking for, then the more fun it is and the better it is behind the chair. So you have the answers if something isn't turning out. You can go back to each of one of these steps, kind of figure out what happened. Is it because of the underlying pigment? Is it because of the developer? Is it because of the white hair coverage? What